We made this.
Engage!
Tea Earl Grey, hot.
There are times, sir, when men of good conscience cannot blindly follow orders.
What we leave behind is not as important as how we've lived.
I'm Captain Jean Luc-Picard of the Federation Starship Enterprise. Make it so.
Welcome back, everyone, to Make It So, a Star Trek Picard podcast talking about the brand new show on CBS All Access and Amazon Prime for the We Made This podcast network. I'm your host, Tony Black, and I'm joined again by my co-host, Kurt North. How you doing, Kurt?
I'm doing well. Nice to be back on the comic scene, the final one.
Yeah, and we're post the first episode of Star Trek Picard as we discuss the third and final issue of the Countdown prequel comic from IDW Publishing. And I get the feeling that this was meant to come out earlier than it has, Kurt. I don't know about you.
Yeah, I thought the way that they were saying that, I think it must have been artwork or something, because there isn't anything that really stops them from releasing it beforehand. There's a perception on the Children of Mars, and their events on Mars that have quite good ramifications here. But other than that, there's not really anything that couldn't have been released. Really, It must have been some sort of publishing problem, I would have thought, because it does seem like it was all prime. Because even at the end of the comic, it says coming on 23rd of January. So
right, exactly. That was, and that's particularly what made me think. This has been delayed a little bit. I think the initial plan was to get that out on possibly the day before Picard's premiere, like the 22nd, because they always release on Wednesdays comics at comics generally, but IDW do. So it's weird though. I mean, we discussed this a little bit on Remembrance, but it's weird the way it's sort of worked out, because if you go into Remembrance and you watch that, and then either you come to the comics afterwards or you come to issue 3 afterwards, it sort of adds a different complexion onto some of the things in Remembrance, and we'll get into this. Yeah. And we hinted at it in that podcast. So, in a weird way, it could be fortuitous for this discussion, at least. Then, had we had this discussion before watching the first episode, who knows? But we've got some interesting things to chew on here.
We have.
But firstly, I will say, as this is being recorded after we put out our episode on Remembrance, thank you to everyone who has listened. It's done really well. We're very pleased with the amount of interaction we've had, the amount of downloads and everything like that. So please do keep letting us know what you think. And I'm even going to thank a couple of people who've left reviews on Apple Podcasts for us, which is fantastic. We really appreciate that, giving us a 5-star rating and review. I'd like to thank BW Desmo for saying that these guys love for Trek in general, and Picard as a character shines through the pod. Can't recommend it enough. So thank you very much. And it could be worse. She's a damn good username.
Must be doing something right.
Yeah, for their comment, which said, "I'm not a Star Trek person. I haven't seen any of the classic Star Trek shows, not even one episode of The Next Generation. However, I quite like Star Trek Discovery and decided to give Picard a go. I loved the first episode, properly loved it. Couldn't stop thinking about it, so I decided to download a few podcasts to see what discussions were being had. Make It So is the best podcast I have heard on the pilot episode. The hosts are cogent, funny, and straightforward." As I said to you a minute ago, Kurt, I don't know who they are, but I appreciate the compliment.
Yeah, we'll have to go and investigate those hosts.
Yeah. And while I didn't get all their references, I did appreciate their attempt to explain most of the episode to neophytes like myself. I cannot wait for the next episode of Picard, and right after it, I'll be listening to the next episode of Make It So. How lovely. Yeah. Thank you very much for that comment. That's the kind of thing that gives us a little boost and keeps it going for us, really. And
it's understood as well. We are conscious that there's people who might not like that person there, that we will try and to avoid confusing people as much as we can, really.
Yeah, I mean, you and I have a pretty good knowledge of Trek lore, I think, but we don't know everything, and there's quite a few things that we'll be going, I'm not sure about that, I'll have to check that date. But we'll try and present extra little facts and commentary as clearly as we can, really, for everybody, because that's the whole thing of Star Trek, isn't it? It's being inclusive. Even if you've watched every episode of the 900 episodes or whatever it is 5 times in your life, or you've never watched one, we just want you to enjoy it. So yeah, thank you guys for those comments. That's really sweet and really nice. And thank you to anyone who's listened either way. So keep doing so. We're going to be back very soon, as we'll talk about at the end, for the second episode of Picard. But today, we're finishing off the comics anyway. So this is the third issue of the Countdown comic, written by Mike Johnson and Kirsten Beyer, who obviously is one of the co-writers and producers on Picard. And where we left it last time, the general story was that Admiral Picard, in the year 2385 or 86, so a good 15 years before, near enough before the events of Star Trek Picard, was helping to evacuate Romulan colony worlds on a ship called the USS Verity with various different crew members to help Romulan civilization before the Hoba supernova impacts, which is incoming.
Correction. It's something I've been meaning to mention. It's now the Romulan sun, because just to explain this, that in the Star Trek 2009 Countdown comic, it was the Hoba star, which is a neighbouring system. And it's something about I didn't read that comic, but it was something about the supernova was really weird, that it turned mass into energy and it affected the Romulan system. But they're saying here that it's the Romulan star, not the Hoba star.
Is the Hobus referenced in the Star Trek movie 2009? Can you remember if the word Hobus is used?
Not without going back to it. I know and I know they mention it in online. I'm pretty sure that it's mentioned online on Star Trek Online, the computer game, but I'm not 100% sure.
See, I don't get me wrong. I mean, either whether it's mentioned actually the Hoba supernova in Star Trek 09 or not, I don't blame them for changing it to the Romulan sun, because it's much easier to sort of explain why Romulus was destroyed as opposed to going the Hobus supernova, and everyone goes, well, what's Hobus mean? Where's that? What's that?
Yeah.
I get that. I completely get the logic there. So that's true, actually. They haven't referenced Hobus in these comics, so I should really correct myself there. That's true.
Because I think they mention it on the interview as well, don't they, in the Picard episode 1, where she says, when the Romulan sun. I think that's where it's been directly mentioned. I'm not sure. I can't remember if it's mentioned in the comic, but yeah, it's
a good point. It is a good point, because they are potentially slightly different points of canon, which are essentially the same thing, that are being moulded. And this is where a lot of people are going to be flipping their lid a little bit about canon and changing things. But again, it's like we said in the last episode. It's one of those things that for the purposes of story, I can live with it.
Yeah.
It's not a massive deal. It's the same thing essentially.
Yeah. Had it been a completely different effect or whatever, I can get it, but it is just something going supernova and affecting Romulan. So the Romulan sun is going supernova, and very soon, and they're evacuating these worlds, and they happen upon they're directed to one called Uyat Beta, where Picard is treated well by the governor and the Romulans there, only to find out there's a slave race called the Uyatis, who there are millions of those, and the Romulans on the planet are willing to sacrifice all of their lives for getting themselves off onto the Verity, the few thousand of them that there are. And Picard says, "This will not stand," or something like that. The line must be drawn here. No further. That's the first contact reference.
And he then goes all in Star Trek Insurrection, since we're talking about films, and starts to help the Uyati rebels and all this kind of thing. But by the end of the second issue, the governor, Shiara, has managed to take control of the Verity up in space, and has sort of stranded Picard on the surface, and it looks like all hell is going to break loose on that ship. And that's where it sort of stands, with an entire race who are set to be destroyed by this oncoming supernova. So, generally, what did you think, before we talk about the bits and bobs in it, Kurt, what did you think about this final issue generally?
Again, it's kind of like, it's fairly straightforward. I didn't like the second to last page, but we'll go into that in the Kurt's weekly supplement. Which we'll talk about. But yeah, I thought it was interesting. I really do find the Tal Shiar and what they're doing really interesting. That's going to be worth a deep dive when we get to there as well, just with what they've done and what the potential ramifications are, and where that leads us going into the show, really, because it seems a bit self-destructive, to say the least. But yeah, I thought it flowed quite nicely. Actually, I quite like the flow of it. It seemed to. It's quite a nice, easy read, really.
Yeah, I thought it was a bit less, I suppose, propulsive than I imagined it might be in terms of some of the plot mechanics of it, and I think it was a bit more talky than I think I expected, maybe. And I think some of the twists and turns didn't go the way I thought they might go.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I can completely understand the decisions that were made in this comic to get to where it needed to be, basically.
And I find it interesting that they've gone to a happy place at the very end as well. I thought it would have been a bit more melancholy than that, but they've actually gone to a point where everything is actually happy, and it's what happens after this that kind of affects everything. So that was an interesting choice in itself.
Yeah, he ends on a surprisingly hopeful note, and I think that's the point. It's to try and unsettle you and wrong-foot you before we get to the premiere. And I think it would have. That's one of the reasons why it's a shame it didn't come out earlier for people, because I think you would have been led into a bit of a false sense of security, especially if you didn't.
Yeah.
If you'd not seen any of the trailers really for Picard, you didn't know much about the setting. You might have thought, actually, yeah, this is going to be Picard back on his doing what he does and everything like that, and it's not at all. But when we get to the series, so it's an interesting third issue. So let's pick through it then. Let's talk about it in more detail. The first page is really interesting, though, isn't it? Because it's Picard sort of ruminating on all the experiences he's had, and you get lots of you get images of him as Locutus and from the Inner Light and from Chain of Command with "There are 4 lights."
Yeah, I thought that. Yeah,
that was really good, wasn't it? And then first contact with the Borg Queen as well, which is really cool.
Yeah. No, I think that because we've seen again, going back to what you said before about seeing this, kind of like looking at this after Picard's already aired, is that it kind of works in quite well with the saying, he's lived multiple lives. And when Daj says, have you ever been a stranger to yourself? And he says many, many times. I think that's really interesting that you've opened with this page. Yeah,
that's true, actually. Yeah, because it's sort of making that point that there's lots of instances where he's been transformed, into various different things, whether it's the experience he has in the Inner Light or becoming Locutus and that harrowing psychological subjugation by the Cardassian, Gul Madred, which most people would never have come back from, let's be honest. But, it's a really cool, and it's just a fun way, I think, to get them to actually be able to draw these these points in Picard's life, but it's very good.
And you do get your wish. You do get Alice Krieg on the Borg, so we've got the Borg Queen there.
That's true. Is that a clue? Is that a reminder that she's coming back, I wonder?
That's just going to be your section.
Yeah. Where's the Borg Queen? That's my weekly section now. Although the other, just on the subject of that, because it comes off the moment in Picard Remembrance when Data puts down the 5 queens on the table, there is a lot of speculation that means Q is going to be involved. Yeah,
I've heard that as well, but they're also saying that it might not be John Delancey Q, and people were saying the Q that was in, was it Voyager? The female one.
The female Q.
Yeah, they were saying potentially it could be someone like that.
That'd be interesting. Although it wouldn't be the same, would it?
No.
Like if you're going to have Q, you've got to have John Delancey, surely. And he's still going. He's still like acting, and he's just. Just Q pretending to be older would be fun,
Yeah, come on, Picard, you're looking old, and be like going, and he's like, come on, I've joined you.
yeah, exactly, yeah. I look old now too, Picard. Hey, I wouldn't surprise me. Would not surprise me in the least. Anyway, he's not in this comic, sadly. No. But yeah, we're back on UYAP Beta then, and things don't look very good. Picard and Raffi are captured by the Romulans and by Zaban, who is one of his eventual carers in Remembrance. But it's a trick. It's a trick to trying to get into the Romulan command center of the colony and sort of put Picard's sort of plan in motion, really. But he's still trying to negotiate ultimately. Yeah. Even at this point, even when he's captured, he says to the Romulan guards, just very politely, would you mind patching me through to the bridge of the ship you've basically stolen? So I can talk to the kidnappers.
Oh, it's amazing, isn't it? It is amazing. I thought the interesting of use of these native curs was quite interesting. The fact, they're saying with the Uyatis saying, they're a second, lowest race or whatever. Just like giving that kind of view of Romulans looking down at these creatures as well. Just before we get to the Zaban, the section where he does that, and also what you're talking about, the typical Picard when he just really turns around and goes, I really was hoping to give diplomacy a chance.
Yeah, this is after Zaban's gunned the Romulans.
Yeah.
And they it's true. It's very, very Picardy, isn't it? He's still at that point trying to, talk his way out of situations, which he would often do, on the bridge and things like that, and he would reason with people. So it's a good beat. Yeah. But it's true about the Kurz thing. He's for that very. And it sort of comes back into when he's talking to Shiara later. It's all that, the way Romulans see other people. It's all about conquest. It's all about, subjugation.
Yeah.
And ultimately, they are trying to look after themselves. They're trying to protect themselves. This isolationist element of the Romulan Empire, which is sort of, their hand is being forced on that because of the supernova. But, they still, part of the big thing that sort of comes out of this comic is they're still resisting this. They're still resisting change in a big way, changing who they are, essentially. And that, I think, will be a theme throughout the whole of the show. Certainly the whole of the first season, the idea that the Romulans are still struggling to sort of change their ways, even though the world they had and the empire they had isn't really there anymore. So
yeah, it's really interesting with obviously the Tal Shiar element, which we'll speak about later. But the that really plays into that aspect. So yeah, it's interesting how it's going to be really interesting when we do get the full on kind of, because we've only seen Zaban and Laris in the first episode. When we do get to the point of actually physically, I know Narek as well, but that was literally 2 lines, wasn't it? But just how they react and how they are in general, the personality in the way that they are they, what sort of demeanour are they going to have? Because
by the point of the show, they're in a very different place than they are here. They're here, they're still the Romulan Empire. It's still the same thing. They've just got this terrible event that's about going to happen, really. So yeah, anyway, Picard contacts the Verity. And Governor Shiana is on there, and she seems quite smug. Yeah. She's in his ready rooms, quite comfy here in your ready room, and he's pretty shocked because he ultimately doesn't think that she's on there.
Yeah,
he doesn't realise it, and he's actually trying to contact his crew and discuss with them a plan to sort of get out of their situation, and so he's a bit surprised that she's there. That's the thing. What I remember saying in the last issue, it was pretty easy the way, the way she took control of that massive starship.
Yeah, only it wasn't quite as easy as you thought. So, which is quite good.
Well,
really.
Yeah. Well, he says that, doesn't he? He says hijacking a Starfleet vessel is not as easy as you think, which is kind of almost the writers going, yeah, we know it looked like it was piss easy, but we know it's not. But we needed to get her there for the purposes of this. So it's really just one of those. The first few pages are really just a back and forth, aren't they, between her and Picard, in that he gets one up on her by transporting her away into captivity when she thinks that she. And this is the bit I thought this happened all really quite quickly. I expected a lot more of the Verity causing problems and a lot more of her maybe doing something to the. I don't know what I expected really, but I thought there would be more than this of her in control of the Verity causing trouble.
Yeah, I thought there'd be more separation. I thought that obviously Picard is down on the ground there, but it's just as you said before, it's very talky, which I get from a Picard's perspective, because Picard is naturally very talky. But I expected more, likes of the Fountain, which obviously we don't find anything more about, which is a bit disappointing. But not unsurprising. It was one that was more hope than anything else that they would maybe look into that. But
they almost forget about the Uyatis though.
Yeah,
I don't even think they're in this. Visually,
apart from it's just that Kurz comment, isn't it? It's literally just that comment.
Yeah, I think so. There's barely, or there might be a slight mention later on without using their name, but yeah, they sort of used those for and I thought that was a bit of a shame. I wanted. And there's a reference later at the end where they're going to be evacuated and everything seems like it's going to be all right. But I don't know. It felt like that there could have been more with that. Had this maybe been a bit of a longer series, had it been more than 3 issues, I suppose you could have done a little bit more. That's the thing I think I've got from this. It all seems very fast. Like this whole thing, I expected it to be a bit bigger. Yeah. You know, I think it could have done maybe with another couple of issues, actually, this story.
I think that's probably the way that I said before. It seemed to flow, and I think that's probably what it is. It just seems to be, you read it and it's done. Where, it's kind of just moves, and it's perfectly good. But when you start to think about it like we are now, then you can start to go, oh, hang on a second. Then,
you could have fleshed out this, or you could have done that a bit more. Yeah, it's true. But obviously, once Shiana's in captivity, it sort of switches to him and Laris and Saban, and obviously by this point they've helped him get to this point, and But this is the first instance of them sort of turning around and saying we can't leave. They say this 2 times. They say this is where we're meant to be. We can't leave. We've sort of betrayed. We've gone against, or well, we think they've both gone against the Tal Shiar at this point. We're in love. There's all this. This is our home. Yeah. But Picard won't really have it, so so he's a bit more like, no, you got to come. This is in trouble. You're in danger here.
So do you think because of what Saban knows that's half that reason is because they want to just? I mean, it's been relayed that they're in love with each other and they want to be together and they kind of just want to stay out of the limelight. Do they still have this belief that it's not going to happen, or that they'll be safe there and they'll just, like, if they have to, die together? But also the fact that he knows that the minute he steps foot on that spaceship that he's going to have to choose.
Yeah, it could be. Because obviously we find out Saban has a mission. Yeah. And his mission is to help the destruction of the Verity, ultimately. And that Laris isn't involved in that same way, but he is. And I will be honest, I was a bit surprised by that twist, actually, in a good way, because especially having read this after Remembrance, where in that Laris and Saban are older and they're Picard's carers on Earth, and they're as much human as Romulan by that point, and they seem very settled in their middle age, and a comfortable couple living in France, this very nice pastoral life. So it was a bit of a surprise to see the Saban character we know from that show as being somebody who, essentially briefly turns. Yeah. Did that surprise you then as well?
It did surprise me, yeah. And I think the preconception is that what you get from a comic is, we're developing their characters and we're getting their backstory. But when you see them on the screen, they're kind of like just so laid back and kind of chilled out. And you can't equate the two. You can't imagine the actor being what he is here, and I think there's an element of that as well.
It did surprise me, and I suppose it's sort of again to underscore how far we get to with Picard, because when he gets back on the ship, Picard says to his crewmen, he says, you did the right thing, you tried to help these people. Don't become suspicious of everyone. Yeah, don't trust your instincts on that. And little does he realise that Saban has a trick up his sleeve, really, which is. We'll talk about that in a bit, because there is. I don't know if it all moves so fast that I think it's a difficult one. But before then, we've got I think the most interesting bit, which is the conversation he has with Shiana. Shiara? I can never remember.
Sure.
One of them.
Yeah,
sure. I keep saying Shiana or Shiara, and I think I'm getting it mixed up. One of them. Anyway, she's in the brig, and I really like this, because it really sort of establishes very clearly the two points of view. Picard is all about, and it ties into what he says in Remembrance, because he says this is about saving as many lives as I can, and obviously he says that brilliant line, doesn't he, about lives, not human lives or Federation lives, lives.
Yeah, Romulan lives, wasn't it? It was like, but the Romulan lives, no, lives.
No, lives. And this is the way he sees it, whereas the Romulans just believe that this is all a trick. She says, every Romulan world you evacuate is just another piece of the Empire you chip away. The Federation cloaks itself in charity, the better to ensure conquest. So she still is, and she seems to be indicative of quite a few other Romulans, potentially, who just don't trust the Federation.
Yeah.
After
But also as well,
all
it's,
these years.
it's the one comment that I particularly jumped out at me was when she says, "You think you've won," and he says it's not about winning or losing; it's about lives. So he's coming in from almost like a humanist point of view, where you know you don't have to look far with looking in the world today where people use absolutes. You know, we've won this or it's that. It's very black and white, and I think that it's really interesting the two angles that they're coming from, like you say, because he's looking at it from a like a protective and, you know, we need to rescue these many people, but they're just looking at it as like a game or the fact that, you know, we've got this is my dead opinion, I have to win this. And it's really interesting that. And
it makes sense, doesn't it? Because that's how they see things. You know, in all the kind of episodes that Picard would face off against Romulans in, you know, Next Gen, like the Defector or the Enemy or those kind of things, it'd always be like a chess match, wouldn't it? It's always like what they're trying to suss out each other's motives, and it would frequently be very urbane. It was very sort of diplomatically polite with these layers of threat, and that's the very Romulan way of doing things. But yeah, it's proof that they're still in that mindset, and as he says, if conquest was our goal, we'd only need to wait for the supernova to cripple your emperor. And he's right. You know, by doing nothing, they are a bit, and ultimately that's the point, isn't it? The Federation does turn away, and it does decide not to help.
Oh yeah, that's a good point.
And whereas that in itself probably has made them a lot of enemies in the Romulans that survived. Because I mean, and it was interesting. Somebody made on Twitter made the great point that this explains why Nero in Star Trek 09 was so angry, and because he lived through all this, he lived through the Federation withdrawal before the sun goes supernova, and he says in that film when he's talking to Kirk and Spock in that alternate reality, he says, you know, your Federation did nothing, and I was thinking, yes, he does, he does, and I think this is one of the ways where having like Alex Kurtzman as that continuing sort of tether, I suspect he's looked back at that film and gone, well, this sort of ties into Nero's mania, you know, and why he was so angry and so determined to strike back against the Federation, because They didn't help in the end. That
just makes... I mean, I like 09 anyway. I like Star Trek 09 anyway, but I think that watching that back's going to only improve on that now.
So doesn't that tie it in really well? Like, I thought that was great when I read that. So, of course, that makes so much sense. So Picard is trying to make that point, but she won't have it. But I really like that scene. It was brief, but it sort of establishes the 2 points. But then, obviously, they're not out of the woods yet, because then a Romulan ship decloaks, and it's the Tal Shar. And that's where we find out Zhaban has been in league with them, and at first it's a bit of a chess match, because, you know, Picard understands that there's 2 Tal Shar agents here, and he thinks they've come for them. He thinks they've come to collect Laris and Zhaban after everything that's happened, and they call them Agents Noctis and Avem. And I like the fact you never see the Tal Shar either. You just hear them. You don't see any Romulan faces or anything. They're just this shadowy group on a bird of prey or whatever. But
this is how sad I was, though. I instantly, when I saw Agents Noctis and Avem, I was like, what could that be? How can we rearrange the letters there to make a word? Which I don't think it is.
Did you succeed?
I didn't succeed. No.
I wonder if they're Latin words.
Maybe. Yeah. That might be a very good point. Yeah.
I don't know. As we talk, I'm going to do a quick Google search, but because Noctis sounds to me like it's a Latin word, but I mean it might not be really. Noctis means night in Latin,
right?
Actually,
okay. But I suppose that's thematically right, then, isn't it? Night, because supernova's going. Well, eventually it'll die, and you know it'll take millions of years for it to eventually die. But. There
is a bit of irony, though, in the description of the character behind the name, the masculine name. Noctis is a person who is very dominant and caring. This is the bit. He always expresses himself very directly, and he's a loyal person who will never lie to you.
Okay.
Maybe that was a little bit of an in-joke almost to have. And the name Avem is he's known as a type of bird. I think it's in the Philippines. I think that's reaching. I don't think that's been. I think that's just a coincidence.
Yeah, that means that's not deep diving. That's literally just going to the end of the earth.
Yeah, maybe we're reading too much into it. But yeah, anyway, Zhaban is now in control of the ship because he has the other side of the code that Shiana used to compromise the systems, and she was in on it without knowing.
How did he get hold of that?
Well, it's hard to say, isn't it, actually? Yeah. I don't know.
Anyway.
Maybe, I don't know.
It just jumped to me saying it's not easy to break the ship, but then two people, one for the Tal Shiar and Shania, or whatever she's called, Shania. I'm just going to call her Shania.
Shania Twain, yeah.
That's what came into mind.
Just call her that now.
Yeah, the fact that those two have got half of the codes each, it just seemed a bit, I don't know. Oh, anyway, yeah, it's just a hole.
It puts a spoke in the wheels with, but his relationship, because Picard says, instead of a frontal attack, you earn my trust. How very Romulan of you. It's almost a wonder that he even trusts Zhaban at all after this, and that he's allowed, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's surprising, really. Picard of old wouldn't have done that, I think. He would have been, so angry.
Like the Gormul set scene with in 10-4, not in 10-4, in the boardroom. When he just turns his chair.
Yeah.
He'd be more like that, wouldn't he?
Yeah.
I can imagine him doing that more than anything else.
Turns his back.
Yeah.
All how angry he was at Romulan when she defects to the Marquis as well.
Yeah.
In preemptive strike, because he was really upset about that. And sadly, Star Trek's never given... Although it's not too late, Star Trek's never given us sort of a follow-up to that, really, because you never saw Ro again, technically. Although, Michelle Forbes is still out there, still doing her stuff,
Yeah.
Bring Ro Laren back.
Yeah, I've seen her in something recently. I can't remember what it was.
Treadstone.
Was it Treadstone?
Might be Treadstone.
Oh, it might have been, yeah.
She was in Treadstone.
Right.
This is me saying now, bring back Ro Laren, because she was a cool character. It'd be great to see her again in this new century older. But anyway, yeah, so it's a difficult one, because Zhaban is supposed to now destroy the Verity, because the plan is the Tal Shiar have been in wait through various colony worlds while the Verity's been doing its thing and waiting for the time to strike to destroy the Verity, presumably to prevent this rescue attempt, and to sort of sabotage the Federation's efforts because they don't trust them. And it's funny because Zhaban very quickly then is not a bad guy. It's like, for a brief second, it's like...
No, I didn't finish.
Yeah. He's like, hang on. I know it looks bad, but wait for it. Here comes a Romulan warbird. And it seems like there's a bit of a plan in place. See, I was a bit, unless I missed something, I was a bit confused here. Did Zhaban bring Picard in on this beforehand? Because it seems like he says, Picard says, Commander Vinnox, good to see you again. Although I was rather hoping you'd arrive earlier this time. So, what does he say? He says he returned to the Verity team. He sent a message apprising... No, I don't think he did, because he talks about how he sent a message apprising the Senate of the events at the colony when he got back on the ship.
Right, yeah.
So, I don't know. I don't think he was in on it. I think it was just he told the Romulans what was going on, and then by some luck, really, they've got here.
Yeah, just in time.
I think. So, but that's the thing with Zhaban. Is it that he was going to do it, or had he changed his mind then?
I think he's changed because he does say later on, doesn't he, that, and this is the thing I was going to pick up. I think it's probably a good time to pick it up because the comment after he's saying about the return to Verity, Prize and Senate, the colony, was the Tal Shiar is operating outside the purview of the Senate, which then leads us to the whole Mars equation, whether or not the Tal Shiar... Because the thing about the Tal Shiar, they're saying, effectively, that the Federation are just giving us all this propaganda to make us weaken our defences. And then Zhaban's talking about that he wants to do what Picard's doing and save lives. But what he's realised is the Tal Shiar aren't saving lives. They're just blinded by their natural... conspiracy theories and what they believe that the Federation are doing. They're actually trying to weaken the Romulans, but obviously, as I said before, it's literally that's going to all fail because what is happening is actually happening. So I think he's changed his mind because I think he's realised that they're not messing around here. Something is going to happen.
He sort of says, doesn't he? Yeah, he talks about how he didn't believe the supernova at first. He thought it was just random and it wasn't really going to be a problem. And again, that ties into, I suppose, and we mentioned this in the previous episode, but this idea that of a sudden climate event that people don't necessarily think he's going to. I mean, I really get the feeling with all the climate change problems we're having right now, a lot of people are still thinking it won't happen.
Yeah,
we'll be fine. It's all, and they're not prepared for the fact. Actually, no. Like eventually, something terrible is really going to happen. Like you're going to have a complete flood zone, or you're going to have something really bad, or you're going to run out of food and all this kind of thing. So I think with this, it's a similar sort of thing in that the Romulans went, nah, it won't be as bad as it looks, and then suddenly he realises, well, actually, yeah, like this is going to destroy us all if we don't get out of here and we don't accept that the Federation are trying to help us.
Yeah,
and he says it's because of Laris. Really, it's Laris who sort of made him realise that the Tal Shiar's plotting wasn't the way forward.
Yeah,
really.
Yeah, and it's just the and like we're saying with the whole climate change thing, that the people, governments, and what have you, have all said, oh, we're doing what we can to reduce it, etc., 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 etc. But then you've got this whole now. I mean, the climate movement's been going on for years, but obviously it's been a big thing over the last year or so, and obviously Greta Thunberg's been a massive part of that. But it's the fact that people aren't necessarily listening. I mean, listen to like the Australia incident with the fires, where the president wasn't having it. He was still saying, even though they're burning. And he sort of yearly thing, it's just a freak event and stuff. He just wasn't having it that the coal mining that they do in Australia will have an effect on the climate. He just wasn't accepting it. And I think that kind of, the Tal Shiar is that kind of vehicle to really look into that. Yeah,
I think you're right, because the whole thing about, the governments and all these kind of things in some of these countries not accepting, I mean, obviously America's the same, not accepting these things is because there's a lot of money and there's a lot of lobbyists and there's a lot of companies involved that if they're honest about it and they face up to it, even though they've probably got tons of scientists saying, no, it's real, do something about it, then they cause a lot of people a lot of financial problems, and they have to change a lot of their power systems. And I think if you think of that in terms of the Romulans, the Tal Shiar are probably aware that actually if this supernova is real, then we're in serious danger of losing our status in the quadrant, of losing our power base, of our entire civilization being reduced to a smaller state. Again, it's a little bit of the whole, Russian sort of state kind of apparatus after Chernobyl and these kind of fall of the Cold War, in that they were afraid of all these things that were etching away at them and decaying the system, because they knew that they were sort of a dying superpower. And I think it's a little bit like that with Romulus now. At this point, they know that things have got to change and they're resisting it, and they're just seeing the Tal Shiar are, he says, doesn't he? He says, Zaban says, a Tal Shiar agent's foremost duty is to protect the citizens of the Romulan Empire, citizens whose number grows with every new world colonised, every new native species conquered. So it's that whole idea that maybe their entire way of life is going to have to change, because they're not going to be this vast interstellar empire with if their planets are just, So I think the Tal Shiar are trying to cling on to a system that is dying, and they won't accept it.
Yeah, definitely.
But then Zaban will, because of Picard and because of the strength of Picard's argument.
Yeah, and he's turned onto that, and then obviously he then says, and it wasn't for this woman here, effectively. I don't know where that, I can't see it on my thing at the moment, but I thank the woman who opened them. It says, ironic then that my eyes will be open while embedded on that mission. I thank the woman who opened them. And then she goes, Saban.
No,
and then let's get married on a vineyard.
yeah. Let's just elope to France. Yeah. And that's it. And that's one of the reasons I think that Picard probably does forgive him ultimately, because he knows deep down that his moral compass and his belief in what is true and honest was there all along, even though he planned with the Tal Shiar, when push came to shove, he couldn't do it. He couldn't just go along with this, and he fell in love with a woman who helped him see the light. He met Picard, and he sees in Picard somebody who's willing to stand up for not just his own people but others. Picard epitomises what the Federation's supposed to be, and that's why it really is sharply wrought, isn't it, in Remembrance, when Picard turns around and says, they weren't Starfleet. It's not what we are. And this whole comic to me has seemed like trying to remind everyone and establish what Starfleet are supposed to be. Yeah. Before it all is gone.
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah. Without a doubt, because it's just the way, especially with the way that it ends, and the, This one probably we've had it in the past two issues, but this one for me it seems to be the most Picard that's really pushing that, because there's a lot of like phrases or saying like the Lieutenant Newton when he comes in saying you've got to trust these people. When he talks to Shania Twain, I'm just going to call her Shania Twain. When she talks to him, it seems to be really pushing that message across that that this is what Starfleet is about, and when we come to Picard, it's completely changed when that interview, which is obviously one of the best moments of that episode.
So that's it. It ends with things all seem to be quite well. The Tal Shiar bugger off because they know their back's in the corner.
Yep.
Smart enough to know the numbers were not in their favour, as Picard puts it far more elegantly than I have. So it is Shiana. It is Shiana.
Oh, well, there you go.
Shania. Shiara, whichever. She's in the nick with Commander Vinix. The colony's okay. They're going to get the Uyatis off. But Raffi warns that the Tal Shiar are still out there. They're still going to be doing this. They're still going to be trying to sabotage their mission. But as Picard says, they've lost the advantage of surprise.
Yeah, right.
Which is the point, really. Yeah. A little reminder as well that Raffi calls him JL.
Yes,
which I think we'll see in the show when she turns up. I think she's in it from Maps and Legends. I believe she comes into it in the next episode.
Yeah, well, the 3 episodes I think are the ones where he gets the crew together, isn't it? So it's either going to be the second or third. I've not looked too much into it. I've tried to keep away from any spoilers from that point of view.
I'm largely guessing there,
but
I think she's in it soon.
It wouldn't surprise me, but the first person that you would go to. So.
Yeah, although it's from what I've heard in the pre-release material, they had a falling out at some point. So, but that doesn't happen here because Raffi doesn't have a lot to do in this. Admittedly, that's this final issue. She's sort of standing next to him, but she doesn't really have a lot to say. And I thought you might get more on their relationship a little bit in this series, and it sets it up. It establishes that they worked together for a long time and they had a good dynamic. But
but other than
it's
that,
sort of left a little bit.
Yeah, it's kind of just a set, almost like a set plate, isn't it? It's not really added anything to it.
But reading this though, you'll when you see them reunite in the future, it will give you a little bit of an extra kind of it's Raffi because we've met her already. So it's quite nice if you've read this comic before you watch the first time we see her in Picard, because she won't be a complete stranger, which is quite cool. But and this is where it sort of ends with Picard sort of insisting that Laris and Saban come with him, and they're still refusing to go anywhere. That, he says, come with me, I'll put you on another planet where it's safe. And then they're making the point that, we can't go anywhere. We've betrayed the Tal Shiar.
They'll come after them, kind of thing, yeah.
Yeah, will come after us, although that makes me think, well, why would you stay here? Because they know where you are. Does that make any sense? So what are you going to do, hide in the cave under the fountain?
Yeah, nice place to go.
Yeah, not bad, is it? And that's basically where he says, I do know a place. It's as secure a location as I can imagine. You're welcome to stay there as long as you wish. I do wonder if he thought at the time they'd be there for 15 years.
Yeah.
Like, it's a little bit like, when you say to a friend, hey, come stay at mine. If you need a place to stay, come. I don't think you think they're going to be there in nearly 2 decades.
You're expecting maybe a couple of weeks. Go and find yourself a new place.
Yeah, exactly.
Settle down.
Yeah. They're on Earth. They've got an entire planet they could go and live anywhere, but they could go live in Italy if they really want to get in touch with the Romulan kind of Roman things. But no, they decide to stick around. It's quite helpful though, because in these dotage, they become very helpful. And he says, "Are you still interested in winemaking?" So that's a nice little wink, they're going to Chateau Picard, guys. But no, I think it does a good job of establishing that relationship with those two. So by the time you watch Remembrance, you've got a little bit of backstory there and a little bit of...
It's been really interesting because I mentioned this at the beginning of our journey that I'm not a huge... having extra footage and things like that. I did it with the webisodes, like we mentioned. There's Lost Missing Pieces, and there was the Battlestar Galactica webisodes and things like that. But I wasn't really... I struggle, especially with Trek, because there's so much of it, of external novels and comics and stuff like that. I didn't read the old 9 comic. But doing it this way has really been really interesting, because on Twitter, it's been like, who are these two Romulans? And people have been asking, are they Romulans? Are they Vulcans? Or, what about his butler and things like that? So it's been really nice just to like sit there and go, Those two are all right. They've had a bit of adventure, 10, 15 years ago. So it has been really nice from that point of view that, something that I potentially might not have done that has given me that little bit of bonus. I mean, obviously, the Matrix had a game as well, which I used to play, but just having that little bit more information, especially if it's considered canon, then that really helps to embellish the story as such.
And I think that's one of the good things about the way they're structuring this universe now, in that you're getting a lot of that from this time material. You're getting it from these comics. You're getting it from books. Yeah. They've done a lot of work on that with Discovery. Fleshing out areas of that show.
Because I think Bayer's been the main kind of person, because I don't think she's on Discovery, but she's only as a consultant, I think, isn't she? Whereas this one she's been fully involved in, and I think that
much more involved.
Yeah, and as you say with Alex Kurtzman having the overarching thing, I think she's probably been the most important person to knit all this together.
It sounds like she has actually, and she's got a working knowledge of a lot of the comic and the tie into novel lore and that kind of thing. And the way I've heard them all talk about it, I've been at panels with people like Una McCormack, who hopefully we're going to get on this show actually to talk about her novel, the Star Trek Picard novel coming soon. And James Swallow, who write a lot of these novels, and people like that, and they talk about how they swap emails with Kirsten Beyer and people involved in, not necessarily Alex Kurtzman and people like that, but people involved in CBS and all this, and they've got a whole network where they talk about plots and they share scripts and this isn't just script writers, this is novelists, this is comic book writers, and they all sort of share all information, and it's great because you can see it working, you can see how they're connecting the dots with all these things. And you don't have to have read Countdown to enjoy Star Trek Picard by any means. No. You really don't. But it just adds a little bit of an extra layer. And that's what you get when you try and connect up a universe. And there'll be some things that don't quite fit, or there might be certain things that stick out. But by and large, this comic series has been pretty successful in that.
Yeah, well, I think my trepidation was because there was... Do people consider this canon? Where do we even start? That for me is the hardest thing for Star Trek, especially because there's so much of it. I think the only book that I've actually read is Death in Winter, which was a post-Nemesis one.
Yeah.
Whereas,
good book.
That. Yeah, I enjoyed it. But the having this feel, because it feels like it's all in universe and in canon, and they've got the head round it. And obviously, doing this podcast and stuff, it's giving that feel of like, well, yeah, everything's connecting. If there was a computer game that had her name on it, it'd probably be like, right, I'll go and get that game because I know it'd be, I know it'd be in there and there'd be little hidden gems and stuff.
Yeah,
and it's the knowledge and the confidence of knowing that it's actually involved and it's actually been thought about, which I think is really good for this.
It is really good. There's a discussion to be had actually on that canon stuff, because anything post Nemesis that was written that isn't a tie-in novel to all this stuff is probably not canon now, sadly. There's ton of stuff. There's a ton of amazing stuff that they've done, but all that now is a bit AU now, which is fine. That's okay. It's still there. It's still really easy to enjoy. Trek universe has multiple timelines, so it's fine. Yeah. It's all great, but in terms of this one prime timeline, it's probably not quite there now. But what we might mean is we get lots of other novels that tie in and do all these things, and who knows? The sky's the limit, really. Anyway, let's get to our final scene, which is time for our regular segment. What's happened to Geordie?
He's doing all right. Everything is good where he is at the moment.
Everything is good, because the final scene is on Mars, where we get a brief scene. Interestingly, a very clear shot of Geordie with data. Yeah. An old photo from the old TNG days. And he's talking to Picard about how things are going. It's just a little catch up, really, but it's a very small scene. But it's all about him saying, "Oh, things are great, Geordie. Yeah, things are really good. Yeah. The future is bright, very bright indeed."
It places Geordie at Mars when they're coming back. That's my concern.
Right. So this is ominous, isn't it? Because of what you tell me, because you're worried about Geordie. So why is this ominous?
Because I think that the Armada will, because I think that the Tal Shiar are behind the synths. That the Tal Shiar,
that's the theory. That's our theory, isn't it? That the Tal Shiar,
that potentially the Tal Shiar are on that Borg cube and have and used the technology that they may have done. Well, whether or not Soji's involved or not, and because has she been activated? Is she like being turned or anything like that at all? There's that aspect to it potentially. I know. Well, we don't know, but the way that the trailers look like, it looks like she gets involved in somehow with Picard. But placing this armada where 10,000 ferries are most of the 10,000 ferries are destroyed. The rogue synths are turned. The Tal Shiar don't believe the Federation are doing this out for the good of their hearts, and then there's no surprise. It just everything is pointing towards the Tal Shiar in doing something with these synths, and potentially destroying Utopia Planitia, which of course is where Geordi is. So I'm not saying he hasn't survived. I'm not saying he might not have survived, but it's put him in that area at the time when things are going to happen.
He's in the danger zone, isn't he? I think it's a good scene because it is quite ominous. If you know. See, what's interesting is that by this point you've read this comic. Even if this has come out before Picard's first episode, there's a good chance you've seen Children of Mars. Yeah. So you know that Mars is in trouble. So there's an ominous sense to this, that everything seems rosy, but there's going to be something terrible happen very, very soon. Yeah. And then Remembrance obviously clarifies Utopia Planitia was destroyed, Mars, all these deaths as we talked about. So it's, again, setting it up for, oh, cool, things are good, hey! And then, no, actually. So whether or not Georgie's dead, I mean, we were talking on Twitter, weren't we? And I think Dr. Trek himself, Larry Nemeczek, said that he agreed that he didn't think that Geordi would be killed off screen. Yeah. And I am inclined to believe that, really. I think it'd be a wasted opportunity not to have LeVar Burton back. And so I think whether or not we'll get any clarification on this, that he made it before we see him in Picard, which I still think we will this season. Even though they've come out and said that we're not going to see Geordi, we're not going to see Worf, we're not going to see Bev. Yeah. I don't believe them.
I just think that he's been... I know we're going off this comic, but just by placing him on there, we are going to see that attack.
Exactly.
They've put a lot into those scenes. Children of Mars, they've used the scene footage for there. There is an element of a trailer that I've seen where we see the stints on what looks like on Mars. So... Yeah. So
we're going to get more of that.
Yeah, so there's got to be something. And I know we've suggested that it might be on view screen or something, because that way you can do it anywhere in the world. So you don't need to be spotted, do you? So, and his eyes and that will be easily done in post.
Yeah. We'll see. But it leaves us in a very interesting position for the start of Picard. So that's Countdown. That's Countdown all done. We recommend if you haven't read this comic, well, what have you been doing listening to these podcasts? What is wrong with you? But if you haven't, do go and read them anyway, because they are good and support the whole new Trekkie-verse that's going on. But it's been fun to pick through them, and I dare say there'll be more, to be honest. I think you'll get another run of comics. You'll get various different ones. They tend to do these short chunk mini-series now around, with Discovery, you get various different things that sort of connect dots. So you may well find you'll get some prequel stuff. You may well find you'll get something that happens between seasons 1 and 2 of Picard. So I don't think this will be the last comic for this show out this year, to be honest, at all. Nothing's been announced, but I think there'll be more down the road.
And we shall follow that up.
We will. We'll be back. Yeah. So you'll be back sooner, talking about Maps and Legends.
Will be.
Very soon, within a matter of days. So until then, Kurt, where can people check out what you do?
You can find me online on Twitter. That's at rmuldrake. That's RMULDRAKE.
Awesome. And I'll be back for episode 3 Picard in just over a week's time. But until then, look me up at AJ Black Writer on Twitter. Make sure you check out this podcast at Jean Luc-Picard. And give us a follow, talk to us about the show, tell us what you've liked, tell us what you didn't. And if you can give us a rating and review, as we mentioned at the top of the podcast, thank you to those who have, but that'd be amazing on Apple Podcasts if you could do that, if you're enjoying the show. Help us get a bit better known out there. And remember, we're on the We Made This Podcast network at We Made This Pod. And if you go to www.wemadethispod.com for loads of other really cool podcasts about TV, film, popular culture, and more. So, we'll be back very soon. So until then, fire up the warp drive and engage.